obviously, I think the goal here is, how can organizations craft kind of effective, engaging, transparent reports that, provide benefits to the organization and also support any specific kind of compliance needs that an organization has. And I think, there's a lot of reasons why an organization would want to do impact reporting. First off, if the organization is having positive impact, right, you should talk about it. I think it's important to kind of show it off and message the good work that you're doing. It can definitely be useful in terms of kind of building brand and reputation. Like impact reporting is in some sense kind of a marketing and communication and brand building form of messaging that the organization can do. And I think particularly when you have certain stakeholders, like again, your employees or just the general public or your customers or investors who are looking for this type of information, it's obviously really, really important to provide it. And again, there may be specific kind of compliance reasons for that. But overall, this is really about kind of, again, building trust, building reputation in ways that obviously resonate with a lot of people, particularly, younger people, a lot of employees, a lot of customers and consumers. And, there's a lot of drive and desire and I think appetite for organizations to show and demonstrate leadership in these areas. So I think, first off, it's often helpful to kind of look both like externally and internally. And I think the best impact reporting is kind of considering both, the top down and bottom up reality of what's going on in the organization. There are like a lot of laws in the world now, particularly laws that relate to sustainability, like climate reporting, but also laws related to human rights due diligence or labor standards or potentially like diversity, equity, and inclusion in various parts of the world. And if you're in an organization that is large enough or that has to comply with some of these specific standards or laws or regulations, like that's a very, very important place to start in terms of thinking about kind of what standards apply to your organization and how you can report in ways that align with them. But also like why? And I think that's another like important question. So there's a pretty broad-based sustainability or impact reporting standards ecosystem. I think most people are familiar with like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are probably the most widely kind of practiced and also messaged set of like global principles around impact reporting. But there's also standards like GRI or the ISSB. There's specific laws, like for example, the EU CSRD, which have impact reporting kind of provisions or sections in them. And so, when you're thinking about impact reporting, you want to think about, how to structure this information. Again, what are different stakeholders looking for from you or from your organization? And also, it can be great to look again at existing kind of operational reporting frameworks to find specific references that would be useful. Once you've kind of determined like why you need to report and who you potentially need to report to, then you can kind of think about your narrative as well as your like supporting actions and data points. So, lead with kind of an overall mission or a theory of change if you're coming from the nonprofit world, but really think about kind of like what's this organization's purpose? What does the organization really care about? And pick specific areas that you feel you can make an impact. Again, this could be like geographical or regional, like we want to have an impact in a specific country or within a specific segment or in the communities or cities where we have like an operational presence or where our employees live. Or it could be more kind of, again, aspirational and aligned with the mission. Again, I think as we've talked about a lot, impact reporting, it's very important, particularly now, to be like, for lack of a better word, kind of data driven and evidence based. I think where a lot of organizations run into trouble is they kind of present very like wishy-washy or aspirational statements, but they don't really have anything to back it up or make it concrete. Like you really want to think about, what are concrete actions and projects, as well as like data points and KPIs that can underline what you're doing. Marshaling resources is important too. Making sure that you have organizational buy-in, making sure that you have budget that you need, you have the right kind of people, partnerships, and support as well, right? A lot of organizations, and I think particularly, whether you're on the corporate side or the nonprofit side or the regulatory side, a lot of the most impactful kind of collaborations or programs end up being kind of multi-sector or like public-private, right? So you might see a company partner with an NGO, or you might see like a government private partner with a private sector organization or a nonprofit working with a for-profit. So typically, again, finding kind of the place where a certain organization has strengths, right? One maybe has more budget or more resources, or one maybe is like closer to specific frontline communities or areas where impact is happening or has more experience doing actual impact work. It can be great to kind of marry those things up. And then once you've done that and you've kind of built, again, your resources, your partnerships, and you're clear on your direction, then you can get to work and start making an impact. And so, obviously from there, like progress tracking is pretty important. Having clear KPIs, using, the best measurement tools available to you. A lot of impact tracking and reporting still happens, in spreadsheets or over pretty like manual processes. But there are a lot of great like technology solutions and tools that you can use. Really trying to make sure that you're centralizing this information. So again, if you're more of an international organization or you're an organization working in different places or doing different programs, making sure you can pull that all together. And again, making sure that your underlying kind of documentation also reinforces the claims that you're going to report on, or at least can speak to the good work that you're doing. There are definitely a lot of challenges in this space, and we actually see kind of data collection and data measurement as one of the biggest challenges in impact and sustainability reporting. Obviously you need to have, at least someone on the team who's pretty technical and kind of understands how to do this measurement. There can be kind of complexity around how do you collect it? How do you organize it? Again, if you're collaborating with third parties like vendors or partners or suppliers, or if you're like doing, let's say, impact measurement surveys, you obviously have to reach out to other constituents and make sure that they're providing you with information. So these are definitely like important considerations to work through. This can be time consuming. We definitely invented Brightest, and we're doing as much as we can to try to save time for our clients and our partners. But ultimately, like there is work involved in this, and there is some degree of just manual work required in impact reporting, even if you're using good tools and AI and other kind of productivity benefits. And data quality is also really, really important, right? And data completeness. You want to make sure that you're getting accurate information, you're sort of thinking about things as holistically as possible, and the data points that you're collecting really, again, speak back to the actual impact that you have and aren't kind of surface level or optical measurements. And then finally, once you're there, you're getting into report creation mode. So, whether you're starting with like a system like Brightest or just like a basic outline script or template, it's really good, I think, to think about like an impact report just as like a table of contents. What are the different sections? What are the different key messages? Like start out with like a very simple outline and then start to fill it out. And we definitely feel again that if you're newer to impact reporting, it's very helpful to look at other references. So a lot of organizations have published impact reports and actively do that. So look at how other organizations are presenting information, look at how they're designing things, how they're structuring it. You want to make sure that it like matches your organization and your brand and your capabilities, but there's a lot of good inspiration out there. And then really just like working through report creation. You can create the report yourself, you can create it kind of collaboratively and assign different responsibilities to different teammates. You can hire, consultants or third parties or, copywriters to kind of help you with the creation of the report, or like graphic designers. But you want to make sure that, it's visually appealing, the information is clear, it's a well-structured report. And again, it kind of aligns with industry standards and norms. So again, reference frameworks like the SDGs or GRI or laws like CSRD. see how other organizations are presenting in those ways or how your peers are framing information. And that can be a really, really helpful way to go about it. And then finally, like if you're in a bigger organization, leave time for edits and reviews and approvals. So, we've definitely worked with clients where, it can take multiple weeks for everyone in the organization to sign off. Like, does the board of directors need to approve it? Does legal need to review it? Does corp comms or someone in marketing need to take a look at it? Like, should the finance team sign off on the numbers? Like, just think through all of the internal stakeholders who need to work on things and what they need to do. So to like share some quick practical examples, and then I'll pass it to Michael. This isn't necessarily like calling out organizations that are particularly amazing, and there's so many organizations that are doing good work and good impact reporting. But here's a few kind of concrete examples if it's helpful. So I think one thing that organizations again tend to do pretty well, and this is kind of going back to the basic idea of what I was talking about, is having like kind of clear, like structured, quantifiable information and like organizing it in a way that like aligns with common standards and practices. So it's very, very, again, customary to see something like this example from PayPal, where the organization is mentioning like what SDGs or sustainable development goals they're focused on and like what specifically they've done with like numerical examples. So, 1.3 million loans to small businesses resulting in, 28 billion in access to capital. That's a good sort of quantitative number that again, PayPal can sort of stand behind and, presumably would have like evidence and documentation around how they're specifically supporting certain SDGs like, economic development or growth or partnerships. So again, I like the way that this is structured just because, again, it's very clear, very easy to understand, but it sort of shows that connection between, aspiration, kind of impact, and the actual action and recognition that PayPal's gotten through this work. Bombas is another good one. So they're a fellow B Corp, but they actually do more of like a digital impact report. So a lot of their impact reporting is actually on their website. And again, this is something too in terms of like how you present this information. It can be a microsite on your website. It can be in a PDF document or a report that's downloaded from your website. It can be in multiple places. You can share this out on social media. But I like Bombas specifically because obviously they're an apparel company, but they sort of picked like a specific let's say like focus area around like homelessness and poverty, and a lot of their work is focused on like specifically donating clothing and apparel to people who need it. Again, to keep them warm in the winter and make sure that they're clothed and have the resources they need. So, on their website, right, they have like a very kind of narrative based outline of like, here's the problems or the social issues that we're focused on. Here's like educational material around it. Here are like specific stories from consumers and individual people and customers. So presenting kind of a very, again, like human grounded narrative, and then talking about like what they're doing about it. In this case, like donating, 100 million items, which again is quite a lot of apparel. So kind of speaking again to the material kind of concrete contribution that they're having. And again, this is very easy to put together, but it's also kind of bright and colorful and engaging and interactive, and it allows people to go to different things, click on different parts of the site, watch videos and explore this in more depth. So again, you also want to think about kind of the medium for your information. Like it can be fine, and a lot of organizations do put together like a 200-page impact report. But certain people or certain stakeholders, again, like your employees or potential people who might want to work at your organization or your customers, they might not be interested in a 200-page report, but they might be really interested in like a short video or an infographic or something on your website that's showing off what you're doing. Another good one actually that came out kind of recently, and again, this isn't like the flashiest piece of impact reporting, but Netcompany is like actually one of the first organizations that we've seen ever publish like a full CSRD report. So the CSRD is like a corporate sustainability reporting directive, which is like a new law in Europe that requires organizations to report on environmental, social, and governance topics. And I think the good thing about this is Netcompany actually did do a very, very thorough job with this. Like they dedicated 100 pages in this report to CSRD. But what they did a really good job of is they really read and followed the law. And they really understood exactly kind of how the law and how the guidelines are around presenting information. And then they used a lot of like very simple, kind of basic like tables and charts and things to organize information. So again, definitely not as like splashy or engaging as Bombas. And I think partly kind of a different goal where I think Bombas is really trying to like reach and engage people and consumers. Whereas like Net Company's focus is a little more on like compliance, potentially investors and regulators in terms of their impact reporting. But you can still go through the report. It's still pretty visual, and there actually are sections that have like, lots of photos and things. But it's more like you can quickly look at this and say, okay, here are the kind of the impact risks and opportunities from a social perspective that this organization is focusing on. Here's how they're thinking about it, and this is kind of like why they're writing and they're doing this specific information in the report. And then actually, again, not to sort of get too ahead of ourselves, but like here's kind of a very basic example actually that we're sort of working on. So as I mentioned, Brightest is putting together an impact report that we'll be putting out in the coming months. But here's just again like a very basic visual representation of how we took like sustainable development goals, specific indicators, and then described like specific progress or initiatives or things that we're doing. Again, kind of aligning like our overall mission with the SDGs, with specific actions and measurement that we're working on in the organization. And again, we're going to publish a much like broader and more detailed thing that has more kind of proof points and evidence. But again, this idea of again using tables and being very structured in your report, or again presenting your SDGs in this type of way can be very, very effective. So yeah, with that, I thank you for your time and I hope this was helpful. And I will pass it to Michael now. Michael, I think you're on mute.
We cannot hear you. You're on mute right now, Michael.
Sorry.
There
No,
you go.
it's all right. Can you see my screen? All right. So thanks,
Yes.
thank you, Chris, for the introduction. I'm Michael. I'm the founder of Quest, and as Nina explained, Quest is a company that guides organizations through their sustainability journey and helps them communicate their impact. I wrote a lot of first-time sustainability reports in the past for nonprofit, stock-listed companies, and if I'm honest, one of the reasons that I actually found Quest in the past was because I was writing those reports, and I think the way Chris described it was wishy-washy. That was exactly what we were doing, and I was facilitating it. I didn't particularly like it. One of the reasons I found it was Quest was to change to delete the greenwashing from impact reports, for instance. So how do you do that? How do you create a report? How do you start writing reports? There's a couple of key steps that I think are very useful and you need to take. Step number one is to really understand your strategy, overall strategy, and your sustainability strategy. Map all relevant frameworks, just like Chris said. Understand and interpret your sustainability performance. Know your key strengths and pain points. Creating a solid content table, and then you can write all the chapters, and then you design the report. I'll guide you through all of these steps individually. So let's look at understanding your strategy. We need to understand how your sustainability strategy fits into the overall strategy of the company. Is it part of the DNA or is it just a small part of your overall strategy? We need to understand what your sustainability strategy looks like. What are the core pillars or the key pillars, and what are the material topics? I'll come back to material topics in a bit. Now, if you look at that strategy, does that make you a follower or a leader in the space? You have to understand it in order to define which content you want to create. And then lastly, why are you writing the report? Is it because you need to do it in order to be compliant? Is it because your stakeholders expect it? Is it because competition is doing and you want to do the same? That all defines how how you write the report and what you write inside the reports. Now, if you talk about strategy, one of the key aspects is the double materiality, a double materiality assessment. I guess if you plan on working on a sustainability strategy or a sustainability report, this is the thing that you will come across. So most of you might know it, but I'll give you a brief explanation just for the people who don't. Um, Whenever you do a sustainability strategy, one of the first things you'll do is a double materiality assessment, meaning you look at the topics that you have a very big influence on or that have a big influence on you. Um, that means that the double materiality is basically the foundation of your sustainability strategy. What we need to know is why did you decide to make a certain topic material? What are your key achievements when it comes to this topic? But also, where can you still do better? What information is missing? And of course, there's also a lot of ways to do a double materiality assessment. And what we need to know when I'm reading a report, what I want to know is how did you get to those results? How did you get to those material topics? Because sometimes when I see them, I'm thinking this is not right. And there's a lot of ways to do it. So if I have a very clear explanation of how you establish those material topics, but also how you involved all stakeholders to determine them. Um, the next thing is understanding reporting frameworks and which are relevant for you. Chris already spoke about that, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but it's just which framework is right for you. That kind of depends on the size of your company and the sector that you're operating in. For instance, when we do a report for, let's say, a construction company, then GRESB will be an important framework, which is not well known, but in other sectors, there's CDP, there's GRI, there's a lot of others. Just find the one that is relevant to you by analyzing your sector, looking at how competitors are reporting, what frameworks they are using, and look at stakeholder requirements. Uh, then the next thing is understand your performance. And to do that, don't just rely on data. It's important to really involve all relevant stakeholders. So go out, talk to your employees. Don't um, I've written a report once. It was the first time report for a stock listed company, and all I could rely on was information that was given to me by the investor relations manager. The second year, the investor relations manager didn't have time, so he told me to go out, talk to a couple of people inside the company, and build the report based on their input. The first thing they told me was that the first report was full of shit. It was full of lies, and it was missing a lot of information. So go out, talk to the employees, so you get the full story. But also just so you get them involved into the writing process. Talk to customers, talk to partners, talk to NGOs if relevant. Then, of course, you need to understand which data you have available and also what the gap is between the data that you have available and the requirements from the frameworks that are very relevant to you. What's that gap? And you need to understand that in order to be real about it and be transparent about it, to be transparent about what's missing as well. And then, of course, you need to compare with baseline year. You've probably established a baseline year, let's say 2020. That's the year where you started your measurements. How do you compare to that baseline year? But also, how do you compare to competition? Of course, within your sustainability report, you're not going to talk about how you compare to competition, but in order to decide on which content to produce and what to focus on in your content, it is important to know how you compare to competition. And let's say a mistake that a lot of companies make is thinking that they have to be perfect and that they have to know everything from the start. Of course, that's not true. You need to understand your key strengths. And when you talk about key strengths, don't make them more important than they actually are. When you talk about your pain points, don't make them less important than they actually are. You're not perfect, and that's okay. Just be transparent about it. Dare to show vulnerability and dare to say it's okay that I don't know because of this and this reason. Give the context and people will understand. Another mistake, and that's what I hear a lot, that people who spend, let's say, months and months writing the reports or working on the reports, gathering data, is they are then very frustrated by the amount of downloads or by the amount of people who ask questions about the report. Because if we're honest, I don't think there will be one person on this planet who will read your entire report. No one's interested in reading the full thing. What you need to do is to make sure that they find whatever they want to find as soon as possible, as fast as possible, but also that they understand the context. So what can help is a very solid content table. Whenever I write the report for one of our customers, the first thing I do is create a solid content table, typically based on the sustainability strategy, double materiality, the material topics, or core pillars of the strategy. And that's the foundation of your reports. But the goal of a solid content table should be to help people find what they're looking for as soon as possible, but also to give them enough context to interpret the information so they don't ask questions. Uh, Next phase is, of course, write the content. Whenever you write the content, keep in mind your tone of voice. Make sure that you're fully transparent. Again, give your audience everything they are looking for, everything they need to know to understand what your organization is doing, to understand your full impact, without asking questions, without having to do extra research, or without having to make assumptions. Now, Chris already said leave time for edits. That's a very important aspect. So what I wrote down here is if you need multiple languages, avoid inconsistencies and a loss of time. Now, especially when you're creating a book or when you're creating a PDF, I remember back in the day, because right now we typically make a lot of digital reports, but back in the day when we created PDFs, at the end of the report, all of a sudden the CEO took the time to look at the reports and he gave 100 remarks on the English version. Now we need to go back and put all of those versions next to each other. So we had a French version, we had a Dutch version, and we had a German version next to each other, and we had to eradicate all of those inconsistencies in all those languages, which also has an impact on the design. So make sure to integrate that time for edits. Make sure to involve all stakeholders in time so you don't waste a lot of time and money on edits in all types of versions and all types of language versions, because that's costing companies a lot of money. Then we move into the design phase, a phase that is very much underestimated, I think, because design can be the key to make your content accessible. Sustainability is a very complex thing. You have a lot of data to show. Design can be the way to make that data accessible. Make sure that everyone understands it, make sure it's easy to digest and to navigate the report. You need to, of course, make it consistent with your brand, make sure it's data-driven, but focus on reader comfort. You need to find a perfect balance between showing off, being very aesthetically pleasing, but also showing clarity, being very clear and to the point. You're talking about sustainability reports. Also keep in mind production, make sure that the sizes are very small so people can share it easily. Try to make people not print it, but also think about accessibility. Whenever you work on something in a digital version, make sure that the color contrasts are okay, so people with a reading disability or with visual impairment can also read everything. And color contrast is a very important one to keep in mind. So make sure that the report is accessible to everyone. And then the last thing is you might, as Chris said, you might need to go beyond, or you might want to go beyond a PDF, which is quite classical right now. You can add rich media. You can create a fully digital report. I'll show you a couple of examples. Let me see if I can show you. As an example, this is a report that we made. You can still see it, I think, that we made for Cordale, one of our customers. And this is a fully digital report where you can browse through all chapters. And the beautiful thing is, of course, that you can make things very engaging, very interactive, dynamic. And don't underestimate what it costs to design a report every year. What this company has done is we created a WordPress template, so basically they can reuse the template every year without having the additional cost of design anymore. So right now they're not spending a penny on design. All they do is create a new report within this template. And then maybe a last one that I wanted to show is Dig Deep, just to show you how dynamic it can also be. This is a nonprofit creating a digital report, and you can see how playful it is, how nice it is. What we notice is that a lot of charities and nonprofits tend to go quite far in terms of design and engagement if you compare it to for-profit and yeah, companies who are more focused on compliance typically, but maybe we can learn a thing or two from how they make it very, let's say, easy to digest, very pleasant to look at, how they mix rich media with plain text. So have a look at it, and maybe we can learn a thing or two from them. So that's it. If you have any more questions, just ask them in the chat.
Super. Thank you so much, Michael and Chris, for all these great insights. And I see the chat has been very active, so we already have a few questions. So one just came out actually, and this is a question from Arun, maybe a question for you, Chris. And the question is, what carbon accounting softwares are best or easy to work with to get the data to write an impact report?
Yeah, I guess I can take that one. So, I mean, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't take that one because I'm obviously biased because I think we make a carbon accounting software that is quite good. But I think generally, right, there's a few different considerations when you're thinking about carbon accounting software. Um, I think first, obviously, is like what's the size and complexity of your organization, as well as potentially like the industry or sector that you're in, because certain tools might be better for like very, very complex organizations, and some tools might be much easier to use. So you want to think about like, something that has good usability, but also fits like the complexity that you need. If you're like a global organization, you might need audit trails and multiple entities and like a lot of bells and whistles. Whereas if you're like a small startup, maybe you're just trying to automate things because you don't have a lot of time, and you need to sort of put something together with pretty limited resources. So I think thinking about like your context and the usability is pretty important. Similarly, thinking about kind of the budget that you have as well as like the support model. So like, have you done carbon accounting before? Do you know how it works? If yes, then you can probably get by more easily with your own kind of initiative. Whereas if you've never done it before, if you are less confident in it, you might need an organization that can really like work with you and kind of give you a lot of time and attention and walk you through the steps. So yeah, I mean, I think it's like, I think Brightest could be a really good fit for certain types of organizations, and we typically work with like mid to large companies. Whereas if you're like a really small startup, like we might not be the best fit for you, or we might be a little more expensive. But I think the way to think about it is like, what's your use case? What's the size and complexity of your organization? What's your maturity? And then look at like usability, budget, capabilities, and any like special features, and also just understanding like where does your carbon footprint come from? Like if you're a very travel-based organization and you have a lot of like transportation emissions, think about that. Or if you're a very like built environment organization that has like, utility bills and buildings and things like that, that's a different type of use case. So I hope that's helpful, but think about that as kind of a lens for making good decisions.
Maybe something I could add as well, because of course Chris cannot boast too much about his own product. But we as Quest as consultants, we get contacted by these type of let's say carbon accounting softwares, ESG software tools quite a lot. What we see is two types of formats, right? You have the companies focusing purely on carbon accounting, and then you have the platforms that are focusing on ESG as a whole, as a broader system. Um, and I think if you have the budget, of course, the best thing you can do is go for an option that goes beyond the carbon accounting, where you have everything all in one in terms of data gathering, because that will make your life so much easier. And that's basically why we're doing these sessions with Brightest as well, because we think they have the, let's say, the most all-encompassing solution. Um, that's also one thing that I wanted to say about sustainability reports is we need to make sure that we get out of the carbon tunnel vision, and a sustainability report is not just about the carbon, it's about the full ESG. And that's why I would highly recommend working with ESG platforms rather than carbon accounting softwares.
Thank you so much for both of your feedback. And then there was another question from Mega, which was, and maybe you can answer that one, Michael. I see that you are also answering a little bit in the chat already. And the question is, would you give an example of the current organization which produces an impact report and is a small organization?
I don't. I was searching for it, but then I had to present, so I'll get back to you, Mega, a bit more detail. But I don't know an example by heart. I mean, Quest produced a report, but I wouldn't say it. I wouldn't call this one best practice, to be honest. We produced one 3 years ago when we were just three people. But a good thing to keep in mind is, again, it doesn't need to be perfect when you're just starting up. It makes your life easy because you know that you want to produce a report in the next year, let's say, so you know which data you need to start gathering. That's already puts you in a good place. And when you're this small, I mean, don't make it overly complex, I would say. A good impact report could also be a set of videos from the team explaining the impact, explaining what they've done, explaining what they haven't done, what could be improved. It could be a Google Docs, it could be a PDF, but it could also be a section on the website. Don't overcomplicate it in this phase, but focus on the quality of your data and yeah, focus on your trustworthiness, I would say, and your credibility. But if I can find an example, I'll send it to Mega.
Fantastic, Michael. Thank you for your feedback. And then we have for Chris a question from Leanne, which is looking at recommending companies to investors in which and with sustainability reports being so different, how can Brightest help us effectively compare different company reports to each other?
So this is more a question around like comparability or like benchmarking, essentially. Yeah, I think it's a good question, right? So, we talked about some of the like best practices and principles, which is, when you're reading a report, obviously like there will be variances in terms of like how things are designed. But you really want to look for, again, kind of like proof and evidence around like what an organization is doing, as well as kind of like a more, I guess you could say, like thoughtful or like holistic lens on impact. Because like, for example, just to sort of talk about it, right? Like we've seen companies, and it's very common, particularly like in the United States or maybe in the UK, that an organization would like make a donation to charity around a specific cause. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like there's lots of nonprofits that do great work, and I think funding them is really good. But it's like you could make a one-off donation toward a specific cause. And let's say again, your cause is like, I don't know, like empowering underrepresented like entrepreneurs, right? Like female entrepreneurs or people of color. But I think you could potentially take that a step further and say like, we are going to focus on, making like, for example, like venture investments or like making grants like specifically to underrepresented entrepreneurs and making sure that these companies are successful. Or we're going to go a step further and we're going to look at like limitations to starting a business in a specific community and try to address like education and support resources and like access to capital like in that ecosystem. So there's like different levels of, I guess, like depth of your kind of thesis or vision that you can try to implement around something. And I think, again, we all have like different levels of resources. So you have to do something that, fits within the context of the resources that you have. But I think the deeper you can go or the deeper you see an organization going around that, the better and kind of more credible that, what they're doing is. And lastly, like, I think this is also where standards, particularly again, standards like CSRD or the ISSB help with comparability because it should provide more common structure in these reports that allow you to compare different reports side by side. Like I think a lot of the problems that we have right now, or at least one sort of challenge in the industry, is that everyone has kind of free license to report however they want. And so like the more standards adoption that you see and the more standards adoption an organization has, it makes it easier to compare reports. And then there's a lot of like, good tools that are coming out that also sort of enable comparison, right? Like Google's like Notebook LLM. I don't know if anyone's used that. But you could put two different reports in like Notebook LLM and ask Notebook LLM to like compare them. So things like that can also be helpful. But I think generally, I guess maybe to summarize, it's like look at the amount of like quantification, look at like the level of thoughtfulness and how like deep or holistic an organization is trying to go, and then try to find ways or structures or standards that allow for like cross comparability.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And then we have another question from Leanne as well, and maybe you can answer that one, Michael. Which is there a sustainability report verification and validation tool that exists?
I know there's a lot of organizations who do it, but I don't know of any tool, to be honest, that exists. I remember a company who told me that they were working on it, but that's been a while and I haven't seen it come to fruition yet. So it must be a hard one, but I don't know of any tool just yet. No.
So companies can just say whatever they want, and there's no verification that that's actually happening?
Well, if you're a stock listed company, you will have a third party auditor looking at your report, of course. But that's
Okay.
typically like EY, Ernst and Young, the big four type of companies who do an audit of what you're saying. Um, and yeah, to be honest, I think there's still a lot of a lot of lies and let's say
Right.
exaggeration in or making you look at the other way kind of
Hmm.
content in a lot of reports. And we're moving towards an age where that will become harder and harder, right? Because people have access to so much more information. So
Mm.
lying, greenwashing, it will be picked up. People will notice at some point, but so it will become harder, but it's still happening. And only if you're stock listed or just a little bit below, but and you're close to stock listed, only then you have a sort of third party verification of your report done by an auditor.
Okay, I guess not so much of what's actually in the report, but what they've left out of the report.
It's both. It's both.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Michael.
Yes.
Thank you.
And we also thank you, Michael. We also have some comments in the chat that we see a lot of greenwashing and that companies need to take accountability. And another comment from Arun that says that for certain regulated firms, you actually need to have it third party approved. And that's also what we see in Europe with, for instance, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, right? You need to have it audited, you need to have limited assurance. So this is a trend that's going in the right direction.
And I think one of the challenges for both people writing the reports, but also reading them, and also to take away the greenwashing. And what I am missing a lot is contextualizing data. We need to give more context to the data that we present so people understand it better. That's actually the question that Leanne asked to Chris as well. It's comparability, and as a company writing a report, if you want to do it well, the best thing you can do is contextualize your data so people don't interpret it on their own terms. Make sure that you have control of how they interpret the data by giving sufficient context. And that's I feel what's missing in the entire sustainability reporting scene, typically also in terms of ESG, is just give context so people understand it better. And that's for people reading it, but also internal teams, make them understand, make it easy for them to understand so they don't have to guess.
That's a really good point. Thank you so much, Michael. We have GDA raising his or her hands. Feel free to unmute yourself and share your comments.
Sure. Thanks, Michael and Chris, for the wonderful session. A quick question. So if you look at financial reports or any other reports, it is a set structure. And usually because of the structure, there is a less ambiguity for interpretation. There is a less freedom for organization to kind of, step outside of those boundaries. Um, According to your experience, how much time do you think the space will need to be able to navigate towards that structure? Because right now, what is happening is that, like, there are fancy reports, there are good looking reports, but I think it's just, I mean, I don't have a hair partly because I've read a bunch of them. And so I'm just kind of curious to, so like, it seems like by design there is a ambiguity. Is there a way we can bridge that ambiguity there somewhere?
I guess maybe I can start from my perspective. So I guess, in terms of kind of any enforcement in the United States, this actually is something that the SEC was trying to work on, which is trying to get sustainability reporting into financial statements in a way that is consistent. I think specifically the US is probably going to need about 4 years until we can potentially revisit that point. But you are starting to see it in a lot of other countries. And as I mentioned, like the CSRD is a good example of like aligning sustainability reporting with financial reporting in like one integrated statement. And then the other one would be the ISSB, which is actually coming from the IFRS. I think for those of you who don't know, the IFRS is actually like international financial reporting standards. So a lot of organizations in a lot of different countries publish their financials based on IFRS guidelines. And so the IFRS is now doing sustainability reporting standards. Right now, it's primarily carbon, climate risk, and some general standards. But both CSRD and ISSB are trying to align financial reporting with sustainability reporting. I think in the EU, we're probably about 3 years away from, pretty much every company kind of putting out like an integrated report that's like very comparable, very clear cut, and like aligns CSRD requirements with financial requirements. It's starting to actually happen now. Like this is the first year that some organizations are doing it. But again, I think it might take another year or two to really become common practice. And I think maybe a little bit longer in other jurisdictions around the ISSB. But again, Canada, the UK, Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, a lot of different countries are working on this right now. Again, particularly for listed companies. If you're not a listed company, it's maybe a little less clear.
Thank you, Chris. I have two more questions. I'm sorry, but I don't want to hog the space. If anybody else has a question, I want to give them a chance. But if nobody has, I'll come back and ask two more questions.
Go for it.
Okay, my question one is that imagine just a fresh company, maybe a mid to large size company. I want to get started with my ESG report. Is there a template that I can use to just fill up? I know there are many softwares available, and I'm purely asking for an exercise purpose. Let's say I'm a part of this cohort and where we are basically learning more about climate. While reading a report is a fantastic thing, but if there may be a Excel template or there's a Word template where I can just kind of play around with some data, just get a feel of it. Any recommendation would be helpful there.
I guess I can take that. I know that there's a couple of templates that you can find online for sustainability reporting. I also know that a lot of existing tools help you with your sustainability reporting. Let's say those templates, wouldn't recommend them straight away because they're let's say they're not there yet, but they will get there in the future. When it comes to, let's say, templates, what I would look into is again, look at the frameworks. If you look at the frameworks that are there, and one of the biggest ones for now is GRI. That's the one that I typically refer to. Now in the EU, it will be CSRD. There will be in the US also some new frameworks, but look into those and look into all of the questions that they ask. There's very big set there. There's like, let's say for GRI, you can just find an Excel sheet that summarizes all of the key questions that they ask. and that's very, very condensed to analyze. And I would use that as a foundation for your report, because that's basically what you need to be compliant. And then from there, you start to craft your story as well. But start from the framework, I would say.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And my last question is that my understanding is that all this content, recording, slides are available as part of the Terra's study plan. But if it is not, I mean, I'm of course going to share my email address where I can get it. But before I do that, is anybody from Terra here? They can confirm that these things will be available on the study plan.
So I'm not sure, or Leanne, I think you're part of TerraDo, correct?
Yes, I've gone through TerraDo and know a couple of the people that still are there. I'm sure we can message Kirti and see if she would know where to find all the information.
But TerraDo will share the recording with you. It will be published on YouTube, so we'll have access to the
Yes,
recording.
definitely. They always do. Yep. Great. Thanks, Nina.
Of course.
Thank you. Very helpful. Thank you.
Fantastic. So we are reaching the end of this session. Do you have any final words, Chris or Michael, that you would like people to remember before they leave?
I guess on my end, right, like, there definitely are a lot of tools and resources out there. And again, I think the best way to get started, particularly again, if you're a smaller organization or you're new, is again, like look at the standards like Michael and I have mentioned, look at other reference examples, like try to find similar companies in a similar sector or similar peers who have reported before. There are templates out there, again, of like varying quality. Like I think, for example, like Canva has impact reporting templates. Like they're not amazing, but they exist, as a starting point. There are other kind of spreadsheets and resources that you can find. So, I think with a relatively limited budget and limited set of tools, you can get pretty far in terms of creating something. I think the most important thing that I would probably say is like, you know, while this is like a webinar and a conversation focused on impact reporting, like I think the most important thing is like impact doing. So it's like, we shouldn't come at this from the goal of like producing a report. Like we should come at this from the goal of trying to have positive impacts and do positive things. And assuming we're doing those, or assuming we're at least like making progress, then it makes sense to try to report on that and share that information or message it more broadly. So I think, make sure your strategy is in a good place, make sure you are doing impactful things. And then, assuming that's all happening, then, start to think about how you can put it all together. And as Michael said, like it's a progression for everyone. No one's perfect. We see, like billion-dollar companies with thousands of employees who are like struggle with this, for example. So, if you're like a three-person startup or like a solopreneur or a consultant, just know that like this is challenging for pretty much everyone. And it's more a question of, yeah, just like starting somewhere, being authentic, being transparent, and doing the best you can.
Yeah, I agree with basically everything Chris just said. So what we see is a lot of companies, they don't dare to communicate about sustainability anymore because they're afraid of the backlash. I think if you follow everything that Chris and I just explained throughout this session, there's nothing to worry about. Be authentic. Don't overcomplicate. Don't overestimate the importance of what you're really good at. Don't underestimate the importance of your pain points. Just be authentic, know that you're not perfect, and just get started. And know that you can operate at your own level. There's very fancy reports, but there's also less fancy reports that are equally effective for their audience. But get started and contextualize data.
That's a very good ending. Get started and contextualize data. So we'll finish on those words. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And yes, thank you, Michael, for joining us. Thank you, Chris. And thank you for everyone for your participation today. And we will make sure to email the slides to everyone who shared the emails in the chat. And Teradu will also reach out to you with the recording, which will be live on YouTube.
Thank you, Nina, for facilitating.
Of
Yeah, thank you,
course.
Nina. Thanks everyone for joining. Nice to see you. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.